What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be bringing you guys the top 3 Druid builds for Season 6, and no, none of them are going to be Landslide. Now, before we get started, I would like to mention that I will be linking the highest pit clears for each one of these builds down in the description below, as well as the website you can go to track the progression of the highest pit clears for every class this season. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the top 3 builds for the Druid class this season. Coming in at number 3, and I'm actually pretty happy to say this one, is the Companion Wolves build with the highest pit tier clear of 107, which was completed by Kevin Estacoy. Now, the Companion Wolves build has been the best companion build for the Druid pretty much every single season. However, it has still not been strong enough to reach the upper tiers in terms of the Druid meta. However, this season, the Wolves build seen several significant buffs, including a brand new Paragon board with a legendary node specifically for companion builds, as well as a brand new key passive that allowed us to start using companion builds in a meaningful way. Now, this particular Druid build is designed around the Pack Leader Spirit Boon. And what you're attempting to do when you're setting up this Wolves Companion build is to basically get enough attack speed and critical strike chance that you can always proc your Pack Leader Spirit Boon so you can constantly spam the Wolves active skill. And what this allows you to do is to deal an insane amount of single target damage. Now, I know you're probably asking yourself, well, how does that help me clear high tier pits as well as do infernal hordes? Well, this season they also have brought along rune words, and one of the best rune words for this build is the rune word that gives you access to the Spiritborn Vortex ability. Now, if you can imagine what this does is allow you to cluster all these mobs together in one nice location that allows you to transfer that single target damage onto these mob packs and burn them down quite quickly. Now, in my opinion, this is probably the funnest Druid build to play this season because not only is it super easy to build into, but also one of the best ways to run this build is by utilizing the core skill Shred, which gives you a lot of mobility on top of the massive amount of damage you'll be dealing with this build. And it can be quite an enjoyable playstyle for those who are interested in trying out the Druid this season. Moving on to the second top Druid build this season, and that is going to be Hurricane, with the highest pit clear of 108, which was done by the player Danger. Now, I do have to admit that I am not a big fan of this build, and I'm not quite sure why the developers keep buffing this thing like crazy. However, it still belongs in this video because, again, it is a top Druid build this season, and it's also probably one of the easiest Druid builds to make because it doesn't really require any mythic uniques to get started. Now, the way this build functions is centered around the provocation and clarity passives in the Druid skill tree, as well as stacking as much hurricane duration as you possibly can. And what your objective is while playing this build is to basically stack up all of your buffs and then snapshot and overpower critical strike into your hurricane, which then will continue to build damage over time based on your Tempest aspect. Now, ultimately, that's why I'm not a big fan of this build, because you're constantly watching your provocation timer to make sure that you don't waste your overpower on any other skill except for Hurricane. However, if you're willing to practice enough with this setup, you will get accustomed to it, and you will eventually find yourself farming tier 100 dungeons with ease here in Season 6. Now moving on to the cream of the crop, the king of the castle, the #1 Druid build this season currently, and that is the Boulder Kane Bear build. Now, the Boulder Kane build is currently sitting at the #1 spot for the highest Druid pit clear at 108, which was done by the YouTuber JMac. And in my opinion, the Boulder Kane build is probably the best overall build for the Druid this season. It has high survivability, high mobility, and it does a ton of damage and is really easy to use, not just in softcore, but in hardcore as well. In fact, it is my chosen hardcore build for the season. Now, again, much like with Hurricane, the way you're going to be dealing damage with Boulder Kane is by getting those big overpower crits. However, instead of getting them with your Hurricane, you're now going to be getting them with your Boulder skill. Now, again, much like Hurricane, you're still going to be using passives like Provocation, which will allow you to have access to Overpower. However, the biggest single change to the Druid class this season, I would say the MVP of the class in terms of items, is the Hunter's Zenith Ring. And what makes the Hunter Zenith Ring so good this season is that it now allows you to get an overpower crit with your core skills every 30 seconds, which is then also made faster by shapeshifting back and forth between Werewolf and Werebear. Now, because the best version of this build is built around the Vasili's Prayer helmet, making us stay in werebear form, we're constantly ticking that timer towards that overpower crit. Not only that, but this build also incorporates shapeshifting very easily into itself by using the claw or shred skill, depending on what build you're using, to maintain your buffs. Now, if you can imagine what this will allow you to do once you're comfortable with this setup, is to basically cast a bunch of overpowered critical strike boulders into your hurricane, which will then deal a massive amount of damage, allowing you to scale into those tier 100 plus pit tiers. Now, this build does take some practice as well. However, it's nowhere near the amount of practice it would take to become efficient with the hurricane build. And not only that, but you're not constantly watching for your provocation to build up. And there's also a lot of pretty cool attack animations going on screen that make this build a lot more appealing to most players. Now, I do want to mention that there are some downsides to this build. However, one of the biggest downsides, which was waller enemies that would completely destroy your borders, has now effectively been removed from the game, making this build a lot more fun to play. But you still have to watch out for those suppressor enemies, and you also need to be careful when fighting Andariel, especially if you're playing in hardcore. But if you're a druid lover like I am and you're looking to return to the class, I highly recommend this build because it just covers all of the bases. It has that survivability, the damage, the mobility that you're looking for, with very few downsides, especially after the waller fix. But that's it for the video, guys. Those are the top 3 druid builds so far this season. Now, obviously, everything could change whenever the mid-season patch comes out. However, I would not hold my breath on that because historically, Druid never really sees much changes in any patch. That is, unless they're looking to nerf something that doesn't really need to be nerfed, but they just decided on a whim to make that decision, much like they did to Cataclysm for Season 6. But anyways, guys, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. What's your favorite build for the Druid class this season? Mine personally is Shred. And also let me know what your highest pit clear is, or if you're even interested in doing that. Also, do remember a link to all of my builds, as well as the highest pit clears for each one of the mentioned builds in this video, will be down in the description below. And if you do happen to stop by one of those channels, go ahead and say what's up and tell them Niko sent you. But as always, guys, I hope you're having a great day or a great night, depending on wherever you're from. And peace out. I will see you in the next one.